Hello, and welcome to another TOG chat. Joined today, I'm Robert Osborne. I'm principal of the Osborne Group, and I'm joined today by Karen Osborne. Hi, Karen. How are you?
Hi.
And Laurel McCombs. How are you, Laurel?
Good.
So yeah, it's been a while, I think, since the three of us have been on a TOG chat together. So it's nice to see both of you, and it's nice to be on a call with both of you. And so today we're going to talk about year-end stewardship. So it's the year is rapidly coming to an end, but there's still time to do stewardship. In fact, it's pretty important, I think, that we think about stewardship now. Probably many of you have appeals going out soon. You have maybe you have some events, but this is pretty much prime fundraising time, but it's still really important that we think about how do we let our donors know that they're appreciated, and how do we let our donors know that they're making an impact. So I'm going to start with you, Karen. You've had a framework that you've been working with for the last year or so, and so maybe you can talk about it and a little bit, because I think it works pretty well for stewardship, and just explain it to us, and then we'll talk some practical advice.
Yeah, thanks. So this has been on my mind for a while. As Bob said, I've been thinking about this, but when COVID hit, it just made so much sense to me. So it starts with proven practice. You know, a lot of people use the word best practices, but you really want to focus on proven practices. The three of us are those guys more than me, but the three of us are very data driven. We're like, the Osborne Group is data nerds, and I'm just like trying to keep up. And the thing that I like about proven practice is that it's data backed, right? It's not just because somebody said it, oh, this is best practice. And then when you add best practices, proven practices, to innovations. Look at how many innovations have come out of this pandemic. We have found ways to have good, solid, successful video visits with donors. We've found out ways to have events on remotely, and they're working. People I know are closing big gifts on Zoom. So we've got some new innovative, and that's just one example. There's lots of new innovative things. So if we join proven practice with new innovations that are not just the shiny thing that you're following, that it's backed again with data, and then you subtract unworthy behaviors and activities. Maybe you have none. And all you have to do is add to what you're doing. But there might be things that you're doing that's really not productive, and the data shows you it's not productive, and we should stop doing that. As Laurel just said, as we were waiting to get on, Laurel mentioned to me, she said, so many people are seeing things that they had to stop doing because of the pandemic, and it hasn't really hurt. It hasn't hurt the bottom line. So if you have any unworthy activities and behaviors, you subtract those, and the result is going to be success. The result is going to be that you will really have transformative fundraising. So that's
So let's unpack that a little bit. So Laurel, when you think of proven practice around stewardship, what comes to mind? What are the proven, definitely should be doing, works, every time kind of stewardship?
Well, I think first and foremost, just doing it, right? I think unfortunately, we see far too many organizations that just aren't doing enough of it. And this is something I think all three of us talk about all the time, is that even though I feel like I've been shouting stewardship, to the rooftops for years. And even though, AFP fundraising effectiveness project tells us that donor retention has, wavered between 43 and 48% over the last umpteen bajillion years, and last year dropping down to 43%. And even though we know all these things, and every time I do a stewardship session, people nod at me and say, yes, Laurel, you're right. This is so important. We really have to do this. But then nothing changes. And I was actually on a board. I did a training with a board last week, and I was talking to them about retention, and I had a very astute board member who said, so Laurel, why is it that it's only 43%? And I said, that's a really good question. And I said, it's because far too few organizations actually do anything about it. They just keep going out and doing low return acquisition strategies as their main focus. And, I think especially during the pandemic, we've realized that we have to keep, the only way we're going to survive this is to keep the donors we have. And we have to be just laser focused on that. So I think first and foremost, just do it. I think the other thing that we talk a lot about as a firm is this idea of background stewardship versus kind of moves stewardship. And I think having a really systematic plan for how you do both of those things is really important. So what are those background activities, those kind of broad-based, more, more where that everybody gets, right? Like stewardship for all kind of things, like your annual report, your quarterly newsletter, an impact report that goes out quarterly, a Thanksgiving card that goes out to everyone, something like that, right? Versus those things that you do that are very targeted, very personalized for your leadership annual donors and your major gift donors. And having a really solid plan and then executing that plan all year long, not waiting until right now, 6 weeks before the end of the year, to suddenly say, oh, maybe we should do some stewardship, right? But to actually, and we'll talk at the end before we wrap up a little bit about some things you should be thinking about getting ready for 2021. So I think those are kind of the core things. Do it, do broad-based, do targeted, and do it all year round.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I do think, people don't do stewardship, or they do some recognition, which is part of stewardship, but probably not the most important part of it. They do it when they think about it, which is not often enough, and they don't usually do it as part of a plan. There's no calendar. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think when I think about stewardship and just sort of proven practice, just put 6 or 7 things you're going to do during the year on a calendar and treat it the same way that you wouldn't miss a foundation deadline, or you wouldn't forget to plan your event. You treat it and have some fidelity to it, and actually execute on it. And making sure, I'm a big fan of, and I tell my clients this all the time, if you do nothing else, if you send out 1 or 2 stewardship impact reports a year, that's pretty good by itself. Like if you did nothing else, it wouldn't be great, but it would be pretty good if you just let people know twice a year, hey, your money did something, it made a difference in the world. We're all a little bit better off because of your donation. We would all be, that would be a decent stewardship program in and of itself. Karen, it looked like you wanted to add something.
Well, you just brought it up, and I think it's another problem. And I wonder if you guys agree that a lot of people don't really understand what stewardship is. Mm-hmm. They think that if they send a thank you, and in the thank you, they say, and this is what we're going to do with your money, that is impact reporting. Mm-hmm. Or they think that sending the same letter out every year, they just swap out the story. So last year, we wrote you this exact same letter. Thank you for the difference you make. Here's an example. Here's about Johnny. And then next year, we're going to tell you about Mary, instead of thinking about stewardship strategically. So it's remembering that it's about impact, impact, impact. It's about making the donor the hero of the story. I think that's the other thing that people miss. So they say, dear Bob, thank you for helping us save the oceans. We really appreciate it. And here's all the things we did. We were really good at saving the ocean, and you helped us. Thank you. Instead of, dear Bob, thank you for saving our oceans. Thank you for, putting a child through school. Thank you, whatever that is, making the hero, the donor, the hero of the story. So I think that's also part of proven practice.
And one of the homework assignments that when I do stewardship sessions, one of the homework assignments I always give people is to go back to the last stewardship communication that they sent out and go through in one color, highlight the number of times that you use the word we or us referring to your organization. And then in another color, highlight the number of times you use the word you referring to the donor, right? And I guarantee you, unless you're a star pupil, but for the most part, most people say we, us, referring to the organization far more than they talk about the donor. And we've got to flip that script. And it's something that I think every time people send out stewardship communications, they need to, before it goes out, do that, right? And every time, to your point, every time we can swap us as like this conduit that's making the change happen, every time we can just take ourselves out of the equation, we should, right? And just directly talk about the donor, or as much as we can talk about we as a collective we, including the donor, but
Right.
not just our organization.
So there's 2 months left, roughly, for the end of the year. But really, in some ways, it's less than that. You have maybe 6 weeks or so, 6 or 7 weeks to maybe solicit donors and also to steward them. So what are a couple of things that people can do now and the year that will make a difference and maybe help with that year-end giving? That's either one of you.
Karen, do you want to start or do you want me to jump in?
I can start and then turn it over to you. So one of the things that I believe is to go and look and see, when was that last communication? And is there anybody who hasn't received some kind of impact communication, a video, a letter, something in the last 6 months? Is there anybody that because those are the top of your, and then look and see, of those people, who are my best donors? But you want all of those folks to be at the top of your list. And because you have to start with, where do I focus? And then the next group I would look at is, who do I want to solicit in January, February, March? Maybe they gave a gift in September. Maybe they gave a gift in August, and you really are not going to solicit them for the end of the year. So when was the last time I stewarded them? What do they? And then who that I'm trying to close, and I'll turn this over to Laurel about what we do with those that we're trying to close, because it's very hard, and I'm very interested in both of your thoughts on this. I think it's very hard when we couple, thank you, we so appreciate you, you made such a difference, give me more money. Yeah. When you only have 6 weeks left and I failed to steward somebody, what do I do?
Yeah, and I'm running up, I have a lot of clients who are running up against this right now, who are trying to squeeze all of it in. And as much as I will always say, like, I will never say no to stewardship. Like if somebody says, should I do this stewardship thing? I'm never going to say no to it. But I think there's also, to your point, Karen, there's this recognition that, well, but if you're going to send it and then 2 days later, they're going to get a solicitation in the mail, then maybe it does feel a little false, right? Then maybe the stewardship doesn't feel authentic. It feels like it actually is part of the solicitation strategy, right? And that can feel yucky. And so I think be cognizant of that. But then at the same time, out of the other side of my mouth, I'm going to say, but don't take that for me as me saying don't steward people, right? So I mean, but I think be aware of when your solicitations are dropping and when your stewardship communications are dropping and how that could be perceived by your donor. The big piece of advice I have right now is, if you are worried about kind of getting a lot of messages out in a short period of time, especially to your top donors. Mix up your messengers, and your biggest, most impactful messengers right now is your board. And, you know, how are you getting your board involved in stewardship right now? I know a lot of organizations are, you know, kind of doing this year-end push, like, come on board, go out, we need to raise X amount of money, go ask all your friends. You know, I'm not sure that my board going out and getting $10, $25 gifts from their friends is the best use of their time. I would almost rather say, actually, board, can you make 10 stewardship calls to these $1,000 and up donors before the direct mail drops the first week of December, right? Because that's the other thing too, that's going to make it seem not as inauthentic. If I get a mailed piece of stewardship on Tuesday and then a direct mail solicitation on Thursday, that's what feels inauthentic. But if a board member calls me on Tuesday and says, just, you know, wanted to thank you for everything you've done for us. And by the way, you're probably going to be getting something from us in the mail. There's a great story in there about X, Y, and Z. Just want to make sure that you open that when you get it, right? Because then it's not, you're acknowledging that a solicitation is coming, but the board member's not asking, right? So I think it's a nice way to mix up messengers. I think it's a nice way to address the fact that, well, yeah, we are going to be asking you for a gift, but still make that thank you feel and that impact feel authentic.
I love
Yeah,
that.
I agree with that 100%. And you're thinking exactly the way I was thinking. That I think if you mix up the medium a little bit, then you're at less risk of it seeming like it's a planned strategy in some way. Like if you do 2 direct marketing pieces, that's going to feel different than if you do calls or some kind of online stewardship event, or just you know, reach out to people in some way other than a direct, you know, some way that feels like just a direct marketing approach. And so I have a client right now that's making stewardship calls, and it's been really, really successful. And what's interesting about it is it's leading very directly into solicitations, but in a really good way. Like the donors were really happy to have been contacted by the board chair and by the advancement committee chair, and are almost asking to be solicited and asking to be involved and asking to be part of the organization. And so I really like that idea of using the board, because it does, it just feels more natural, right? And those conversations kind of naturally lead into conversations about impact and what they can be doing. And it's kind of a more of a natural way of moving into that solicitation. And yeah, I think there's probably something to be said for not doing a direct marketing mailing right before a solicitation mailing. But what I like to do sometimes is do it right, do some kind of mailing. It's not necessarily stewardship, but do some kind of mailing, like a newsletter or something after I've done a solicitation, to kind of remind people that they, you know, the difference that they can make. And it kind of serves as both a stewardship piece, but also as a reminder of, have you given? Have you, you know, have you made the impact yet? And I think that works better than what sometimes organizations do, is just like a holiday card or Thanksgiving card or something. It's more, if you can make it more about impact and less just about, you know, we're here and happy holidays. I think that can be a really effective way of using the limited time that we have left between now and the end of the year. So Karen, as part of your...
I was just gonna jump in, Bob.
Sure, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to add that, you know, one of the things one of the best things I learned from Karen about stewardship is surprise, right? And how is you know, what is that element of surprise? First of all, because most people don't do very good stewardship, I feel like any stewardship is surprising to a lot of our donors, unfortunately. But I think about like something like Giving Tuesday that's coming up. A lot of people at this point now kind of do Giving Tuesday because it's like an obligatory thing, like everybody does it, so we've got to do it too. Some people do really great full-blown campaigns that raise a lot of money, but a lot of people just kind of do the bare minimum and don't see a huge return. Like, what if you, instead of getting a small return by doing solicitation on Giving Tuesday, like what if you flip the script and you just did stewardship on Giving Tuesday? Like, what if all of your Giving Tuesday communication was just impact, thank you, appreciation, recognition, donor stories? Like, you know, I don't know. I mean, it hasn't been proven, there's no data around it, but just thinking about, again, to Karen's point about eliminating unworthy behaviors, if you traditionally haven't seen a lot of return from Giving Tuesday, maybe shake it up and do something different.
Yeah. So to sort of segue into that, I'm sorry, Karen, I'm going to ask you a question, but you can chime in with your other thoughts.
I just wanted to give a quick concrete example of what Laurel just said that really worked. It was personally done for me, but it was so concrete and so excellent. And I knew it must be planned. I knew that a gift officer set it up, but it felt so genuine to me. And the CEO, I know he was just probably calling, but he called me to wish me a happy holidays. But he did it to say, I was thinking about you. I was signing cards and there was your name. And I thought I should just pick up the phone and call you. And I just wanted to say, you have made such a difference in our organization, not just, and this is important, that we don't just steward money, that we steward volunteer time, that we steward ideas, that we steward introductions. And so he just, don't know, how did he remember all that? This was a huge national organization. And I'm not like way up here, I'm not like $1 million donor, but I'm one of his middle donors, a good middle donor. And he said, and he rattled off 4 things that I contributed. And then he said, but I can tell you're busy. So you have a great day. And thank you again. Oh my goodness, did I not send in another gift, another end of the year, because I couldn't remember, had I responded to that darn solicitation? So sometimes, flipping the script, I love that idea, just, and then making it personal.
Yeah.
I believed him, even though I know a development officer wrote it.
Yeah, but it sounds like it was also authentic. Like both things can be true, right?
Yes, hopefully.
And I think that's probably why it resonated. And I think you raised a really great point about how important it is to steward not just money, but to steward volunteerism and other contributions to the organization, and that everybody deserves stewardship. A $1 donor deserves it. $1 million donor deserves it. You may have different messaging, in terms of the impact of that dollar versus the impact of $1 million, but everybody deserves, yes. In fact, you should have a different messaging, and that's a slightly different conversation. But that everybody deserves that stewardship, and everybody deserves to understand that they did make a difference. So part of the formula, Karen, that you had talked about at the beginning of the chat was around data, and really using data to drive decisions around stewardship. So what should we be tracking? What should we be looking at? Like, how do we use data to strengthen our stewardship?
Well, I'll start, but we really need to talk to the data nerds about this. But the biggest one, of course, well, the 2 biggest ones, I think, are retention, and donor satisfaction. How do they feel good about, if I ask, I remember doing an interview, one of our clients, and I asked him, did he feel good? Now, he was a $250,000 donor. And I asked him, do you think your gifts make a difference? And he said, I hope so. I hope so. And then I said, well, is there any place that you give to that you feel makes a difference? And his face lit up. And he talked about the food bank that he gives to. And we want people to feel good about their giving. It's not just that they stick with us, because he was sticking with them. He was if you just looked at your donor retention numbers, he would be right up there. He was a good, solid donor. He might have been a much bigger donor, though, if he could make the face light up when you ask the question and say, oh, he says, yeah, I love giving to the food bank because, and then he tells me the stories, and 250,000, he wasn't giving 250,000 to the food bank.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where, Karen, when you talk about kind of that next level of data, right? That's where we can start to, I absolutely agree with you. Retention and donor satisfaction at its core, if you're just getting started with measuring, if you're not sure where to start, those two things, and donor retention, pretty easy number, even if you're just working off an Excel spreadsheet, which hopefully people aren't anymore, but even if you are, you can still figure out your donor retention. And then donor satisfaction, is a combination of anecdotal information and surveys and, various ways to gather that information. But I think then, you kind of look at even once I look at that, I still have burning questions about donors like that. And that's where I start to look at things like, are your donors giving at capacity? I look at things like upgrade rates. So, great that you have a donor who gives you $100 every single year, but he gives 10 other charities $10,000 every year. So is that so good that we're retaining them at $100? I don't know, right? So, I think being able to look at giving at capacity and upgrade rate, are we keeping donors, but then are we also getting them to give more every year? And then I love the idea of looking at, especially for your biggest donors, looking at lifetime value and looking at, how much has, over the course of a donor's lifetime with your organization, how much have they given? And the other thing I love about that number is it not only can tell us a lot about what stewardship strategies work, because obviously donors that maybe have higher lifetime values, if we went back and said, well, what did we do with them? We can start to go back and diagnose what worked. And then with people who either dropped off or who have lower lifetime values, we can kind of say, oh, maybe we shouldn't focus on those strategies. But it also helps us with acquisition strategies, right? Because we can also go back and see, which acquisition strategies are leading us to have donors with higher lifetime values. So, that's overall just a really nice number. I think that can answer a lot of questions, but I don't know, Bob, what other things do you look at?
Yeah, well, I'm going to give Karen a little credit because I think she's been she says she's not as data driven as us, but I'm not totally sure that that's completely true. But I know, Karen, that you've mentioned many times over the years about really looking at like your third year retention rate, because it's often really much higher than your first or second year retention rate. And if you can kind of understand what that rate is and what your first year rate is, and move and increase your rate so that you get to that third year and that much higher retention rate than most organizations enjoy, there's real practical benefit to that. And, there's real money that's coming in. That's a real empirical case that you can make to your board and to the organization in general about investing in retention early on with your donors. So I think that's like a really simple formula that most organizations can do and look at and follow that has a lot of practical value. The other thing I really like to look at is by gift amount. Like, what is my retention rate from 1 to 999? What is my middle donor retention rate? And that can be really revealing. I have a client right now who's, $1 to $10,000 retention rate is significantly lower than the rest of their the rest of gifts that are higher and gifts that are lower, which is really interesting. So they're spending resources and moving people up into that category and then losing them, and they're not building that pool of potential major donors. And then that's just a strong category of giving anyway. Like if that's strong, probably a lot of other things are going well for that program. And again, that's like a really simple, like once you look at that and you say, oh, this is 15% below what my other retention rates are, there's a pretty clear formula for improvement. And again, really practically making a difference in terms of your fundraising and the organization. So, metrics, Laurel can give you like probably literally 30 different metrics that you can measure, but you don't, but if you're not sort of there, then there are just some really simple ones that I think we've talked about that can, just by looking at retention rates, you can look at retention rates by channel as well. You can break it down as much as you want, but just taking those sort of basic metrics and looking at them in different ways can make a pretty pretty positive effect on your fundraising. And it's not hard to do. You don't have to be a data nerd to really
and then having a plan for it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, exactly.
It. And one of the big ways to fix it is stewardship. Stewardship, I mean, it's not the only, all by itself, it can't change everything, but it can really move
It
the
comes
needle.
close sometimes.
Yes.
Well, and just to add to, I mean, even just retention, right? To Bob's point, you can look at years of retention. You can look at channels. If you do get your board involved, make sure that you're measuring their retention for the people that you have them call, because what a great way to show them the impact of their time and effort by being able to go back and say, hey, just by the way, the board called 100 people at the end of the year, and 90 of them, gave again. And our normal retention rate is 50%, and the retention rate for the people you called was 90%. So, way to go, right? So that's another great way, I think, to use your metrics.
Well, that brings up something that I think is a big, big issue. We've mentioned on this little chat, board, at least 3 times of ways to get your board. What I have seen, however, is that we don't steward the board. So how is the board member going to do a great job on that call if they've never experienced the joy of great stewardship? We say, well, no, the board knows. They know everything. We report at every meeting. We report on all the things that we're accomplishing. So they know. And we always have a mission moment at every board meeting. And we bring in a client, we bring in somebody and they tell a story. So they know. That's not the same thing as saying, Karen, this is the difference you made. When you gave me that idea, this is what I did with it. When you made that gift, that young person that came at our mission moment, well, she was there because of you. We forget, we think, even we forget with staff donors. We don't steward staff donors, even if the staff donor is probably one of your better middle donors. They're given $5,000, $3,000 out of their meager salary that you pay them. And what happens? Well, they know. You can't make assumptions like that. Can I give do I have time for a quick story?
Yes.
An example? Okay, this is just really quick. This was one of my donors who knew, he was an inside guy. He could tell you what moves management is. He was like an inside guy, which I tried not to let volunteers know all the things, but he was just Mr. Know It and everything. I'm at a party and he whips out of his pocket, a party for the organization. He whips out of his pocket. He says, Karen, wait till you see what I got in the mail. And I said, what? And he said, the swimming coach, the women's swimming coach wrote me. Like I hadn't read that letter 5 times before it went out the door. And he said, Karen, we should be doing this. This is wonderful. I feel so good about what's happening. And it's because she's teaching leadership. She's not just teaching swimming. Look at that. She's teaching. Even your most sophisticated donor, your most inside person needs authentic stewardship.
Yeah, that's a great story. And the opposite of that is true too. Like you notice when you don't get the stewardship, and you're not always angry, but you kind of make a mental note sometimes. And for me, it's not that I'm mad about it necessarily. I mean, as a development person, I kind of acknowledge it and note it in some way. But you're not inclined to give money to that organization again, just mostly because you just don't know what the last time you did, the last time you gave money, what happened, what it did. And you're not likely to repeat that experience since you don't have any information about, did it make a difference? Was it appreciated? Did anybody even notice that I made this gift? So it can work the other way. I mean, it can be such a positive experience, and it can be not necessarily a negative experience, but it can drag your program down. And I think, you said before that this doesn't solve all of your problems, but I find that it it solves probably 90% of your problems as a fundraising, boil down to, do you do stewardship well? Are you retaining donors because they feel well informed and feel appreciated? Are they upgrading because they have a really good understanding of the impact that they've made? And do they feel like they're part of the organization? Have you pushed them up into being a top 1, 2, or 3 priority? Like if you said, here's a donor who, for any organization, they're a top 3 priority, right? And they've been giving for 7 years in a row. If every donor was like that, or the majority of your database was like that, I mean, you wouldn't need to know anything else about that organization or about that donor to know that that's probably a really healthy, really well-run organization that is doing really, really well when it comes to fundraising. You wouldn't need metrics, you wouldn't need a lot of extra information like that by itself as an organization that is well, very well primed to do well. So we only have a few minutes left. Wondering if you guys have any last thoughts on stewardship, things we should be doing, things we shouldn't be doing, things we haven't talked about yet that we think are important.
I'll just, wrap this up by saying that, great that if you're really zeroing in on doing a bunch of stewardship in the next few weeks, but please make it your 2021 goal to make this a year-round priority.
Yeah. And I would just say, if you need some help, just give us a call, send us an email. We have lots of free tools. We've got lots of great information. We can be of service.
Yeah, it's a thing I think everyone on this call loves and finds creative, and probably one of the most interesting, if not the most interesting part of the work that we do. So, well, thank you guys for joining today on TOG Chat. It's nice to have us all together. We'll have to do it again and do it a little bit more often.
And thank you everybody for watching and listening.
All right, thanks everyone. Till the next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.